Hello and welcome to a very special preview episode with myself, Seb Jones, and Jamie Johnson. I beg your pardon. Usually you would
God, can't even say my name right.
absolutely butcher the start right there, but we'll carry on. Usually you would hear us on the review episode, and if you are listening or watching this one, you can catch our latest review episode that covers all the weekend fixtures in League One. But given we've got a full roster of fixtures this midweek in League One, we thought we'd do this extra bumper episode for you guys, looking ahead to the 12 games all taking place on Tuesday. Lots to cover at both ends of the table. And we'll start with sort of the playoff race and the playoff running before, in the second half, moving on to sort of a few of the clubs towards the bottom end. But the first game we will look at in a bit of detail is Huddersfield Town hosting Wrexham. So Huddersfield got things back on track at the weekend with a victory away at Stevenage. So they will sort of go into this one in a bit of form, bit of momentum maybe, after a bit of a disappointing results before that one. They're at home and they're facing Wrexham, who drew 0-0 at the weekend. Third versus fifth. Should be a taste one, Jamie.
Yeah, big game, isn't it? You mentioned third versus fifth, and that is the real sort of talking point because it is a really important game for both teams. You mentioned sort of bouncing back. They won at the weekend, Huddersfield, after a couple of losses in a row. And one of the things you mentioned on the review show was bounce back ability, and they definitely had that Huddersfield at the weekend. So they'll be hoping just to carry on that form, and they're at home. Wrexham aren't great away from home. They're ninth in the away form table, despite being third in the overall standings, and they've only got 6 wins out of 15 on the road. So they'll be hoping, well, not even hoping, they need to put that right if they're going to stay where they are in the table and try and push for an automatic promotion spot. And Huddersfield will look to take advantage of that. And I think perhaps Huddersfield are going to this one as favourites, if you like, with being that victory at the weekend. Stevenage are a difficult team to beat. They always have been and perhaps always will be. They're one of those sort of gritty League One teams that you never quite know how easy it's going to be. It's always going to be a bit of a challenge when you play them, especially away from home. But they managed to get a result there, and they'll be hoping to carry on that vein, as you mentioned. Very quickly back on track, and a victory puts them just the 1 point behind Wrexham, and they're immediately in the hunt then for the automatic spot, the second place behind Birmingham. So they're in the mix, both of them, third versus fifth. It's just a really tasty game, and it's one of the reasons we're doing this sort of bonus show. There's a few games later on as well, which are similarly big games in terms of top of the table, bottom of the table, playoff race, sort of all those permutations are all running into midweek, and there's a lot of important fixtures on Tuesday night. This definitely one of them.
Yeah, you mentioned sort of Huddersfield having a bit of momentum given the result at the weekend. If we go back right to sort of the end of January, that they've been right from that point to now, they've been very inconsistent. So at the end of January there was 3 defeats, then there was a draw, and then there was 2 victories, one of which local derby against Barnsley, and then there was 2 defeats again, and then they won at the weekend. So it is very hit and miss, very inconsistent, and not really something you would associate with a side in the playoff spots, pretty comfortably in the playoff spots as well. 4 points between them and Bolton in 7th, but they really need to take this as a bit of a turning point to get that consistency back on board now in the latter stage of the season.
Yeah, consistency is key, isn't it? And especially when you're looking to be at the top of the table, you just got to keep winning games of football. And at home, you've got to win games of football. You mentioned our review show. We spoke about Sean Maloney leaving Wigan, and one of the reasons they put it down to his results at home. They're really important at the end of the day, and Huddersfield need to keep that going. That they're not bad at their own patch. The John Smiths is sort of we still call it. But they have to win this game for me if they want to keep in that mix, because in terms of the automatic promotion push, because there's sort of 2 fights there. Birmingham, you can sort of ignore them. We're going to talk about them later on. But they're at the top and they're going to stay there. The race for the league title is almost over, even being in March. and then it leaves 3 or 4 clubs fighting for second place, and then below that, 3, 4, 5 more clubs fighting for those remaining playoff spots. And Huddersfield are they need to see which race they're going to be in. Are they going to be in the race for second, or are they going to be in the race for staying in the playoffs in 4th, 5th, 6th sort of spots? So that is the challenge for me in this one. If they win, they're very much and firmly they are in that battle for the top 2, and we'll see how it goes.
As for Wrexham, it's probably been a slightly disappointing week for them. In midweek, they lost to Peterborough in the semi-final of the EFL Trophy on penalties.
2-0 up as well.
2-0 up as well, yeah. Sort of gut-wrenching, really, to go out on penalties. And then the weekend, the kick-off on Saturday, 0-0 against Bolton. I guess disappointing is relative, but they've got to be not a sense of sort of positivity in the past week around the Wrexham camp, given the highs that they have perhaps hit over the season.
Yeah, they're on a little bit of a blip, aren't they? They've hit a little bit of a stumbling block, if you like. That defeat you mentioned to Peterborough on penalties. This draw before that, they beat Mansfield but lost to Leyton Orient. They've not been insurmountable, if you like, and they had a little bit of a bad run before going on a run of 4 victories in a row, all competitions before these last few games. It's the away form for me. I know I mentioned it a minute ago, and conscious that there are a lot of games to talk about, but the away form is the killer for me in terms of why they aren't more solid in third, or at least, or even in second, because they're only a few points behind Wycombe. But everyone's losing up there, aren't they? Not everybody is picking up results. When they beat Mansfield, they're the only team in the top 6 to pick up 3 points. And that was just a couple of weeks ago. So they're very much still in the mix, and they are rightfully in the mix because they're playing some good football. But at the minute, perhaps on a little bit of an inconsistent vein, just like Huddersfield. So it's just all about who gets the most of it. Probably finish 0-0 after all this setup, but it'll be interesting just who takes the driving seat, because that's what this is the battle for, really. Who is in the driving seat for trying to get into the automatic promotion spots?
Yeah, absolutely that. And we'll move on to chat about a couple of more teams in that playoff push. And that is the game on Tuesday between Charlton and Barnsley. Both of those two sides coming into this one after victory at the weekend. Charlton in the more favourable position in 6th place. So they're in the sort of the hotly coveted, I guess, position that everyone wants to have. Charlton the ones in it at the minute. Barnsley in 10th, 4 points off Charlton, but I guess a win would narrow the gap and would just make things ever so tasty in amongst the pack chasing for the playoff run.
Yeah, exactly. We spoke quite a bit about Barnsley in the review show, so I'm not going to sort of tread on already trodden ground there, but they can cut the gap to 1 point. They're in 10th at the minute, 6th place, obviously Charlton, as you mentioned, in their final playoff spot. This is a big game for Barnsley. If they can win it away from home, it's not an easy, I beg your pardon, place to go at Charlton, and it's the Valley. It's a difficult place to play football as an away side, and they have to be in a fight in this game. And I don't expect it to be pretty, but 3 wins in a row for Barnsley. They put themselves in a good patch. They've been superb, really. Davis, Keeler, Dunn sort of leading that. Phillips as well, of course, have been really pivots in these last few games. They've turned a corner. They just need to keep on that path, and they might scramble themselves back into the playoffs. But Charlton, I've got a question for you, Seb. They've just 1 loss in their last 9 games. You mentioned that perhaps we've not spoke about them enough, as much as we should have done, in terms of how well they've been playing over recent weeks. But do you think they can go on to have a really good end to the season? Because, I mean, if they carry on like they are at the minute, they're going to be, without doubt, in the playoffs, and perhaps even an outside bet for the 2nd place in the table, because they're just been really impressive at the minute. And that late victory against Leyton Orient as well, those jubilant scenes at full time on Saturday.
Yeah, definitely a team flying at the minute. I think they've just gone under the radar. We spoke about this in the review episode. I disagree with slightly in pushing for the top 2. I think that's a bit over-ambitious, but certainly pushing to solidify that spot in the playoff rankings. And I think that they will get there. As long as they keep that consistency. For me, some of the results have been down to the great home form. If we take sort of the points tally, they're on 56 points at the minute, Charlton Athletic. 35 of those have come at home, 21 away from home, 35 at home. So of 17 played at home, won 10, drawn 5, lost 2. So that's really good form. They always say about making your home ground a fortress, and that's something clear they're doing at the Valley. Seems to be a good positive feel about the place under Nathan Jones, and clearly the home form will give them some advantage going in to the fixture on Tuesday night. Only losing 2 games in at home this season, I think it's incredible, really, considering some of the teams that have gone and played at the Valley. I think to come out with that one, is really good going, and for that, I think it will be a tough test for Barnsley going there. Don't get me wrong, it's a tough enough test at the best of times, but given the form they've been on and the home record as well to back that up, I think things are going sort of in Charlton's favour for this one.
Yeah, no, exactly. I think I agree with you. To be honest, home side, you're probably going to back in a team a couple of places above in the table as well. But this one, another, as we mentioned at the very start, in terms of the Huddersfield game, another really big one in terms of the ramifications.
Yeah, massive, absolutely. We'll move on to another side chasing the pack. Seems to be a consistent theme in this one, and that's Leyton Orient.
As if we planned it.
As if we planned it, yeah. Us planning, no. It's Leyton Orient, this one. So Leyton Orient actually fell to defeat at the weekend from Charlton. So, two sides in the mix. You can hear all our thoughts in the review episode that's out on the League One Lowdown YouTube page. Feel free to give it a like. But Leyton Orient travel to South Yorkshire to host a side not in the playoff race, Rotherham United. Rotherham, I think the season's over. Leyton Orient, less so. They're still well amongst in it. Obviously, a slight blip at the weekend, but they're still only 3 points off the playoffs. It's still doable. There's so many sides in that, and Leyton Orient are one of them.
Yeah, but it's exactly doable. There's no doubt about that. I mean, you might have been reading my notes because one of the things I put in there about Rotherham was season's over because they're not going to go up, they're not going to go down. But they showed a bit of character in that victory over Bristol Rovers at the weekend in terms of coming back to win it late on, 92nd minute. Sam Nombe there. But you mentioned Orient. I guess that is obviously the main talking point of the game because they're the team chasing for something at the minute. They're 3 points out of the playoffs after that really crushing defeat at the weekend, losing so late on. They just have to keep pace. This is a big game for them. It's a difficult place to go. I mentioned that about Charlton, but a Steve Evans side at home are usually difficult to beat, and they just need to keep pace. They've got all those injuries at the back, which are causing issues, struggling a bit from set pieces and corners, as Sam alluded to, the words that I got from him on Saturday night, and Rotherham will exploit that. Charlton exploited it in terms of the crosses they got their goals from, and Rotherham will do exactly the same. There'll be no way that Steve Evans looks at that and doesn't think we're going to lump it forward to our big lads up top because that's pragmatic football and it's sensible football and it has worked for Charlton and there's no reason why it won't work for Rotherham. And I think perhaps this game will be more difficult than the league table suggests because not to sound like to Sam from the preview show, but I had a look at the XG table and Rotherham are 11th, Leyton Orient are 12th. In terms of expected goals, if the expected goals translated into victories, then Rotherham would actually be higher than Leyton Orient. So that indicates that it's going to be a very tight game, and I think that will translate into what we see because it's two teams who are at the minute not at their best.
Yeah.
Even if Rotherham did get that victory at the weekend, and they want wins for different reasons. Orient need it in terms of keeping pace. And Rotherham just need it to not fizzle out to the end of the season, really. Just sort of have something to fight for and try and win some games of football. But yeah, huge game for Leyton Orient is probably the top and bottom of it.
Yeah, and Orient actually have lost the last 3 games, so they would want to put things right. They're in a bit of a dangerous spot, really. That the one result either way could see them sort of either get amongst the playoff like spell and running and teams chasing that pack, or they could pretty easily fall out of it with just a couple of bad results. And we've already seen 3 results in the past few weeks go against their favour. So another one really could see them out of it, maybe, perhaps. So yeah, big game, I think, for different reasons for both sides. Obviously, Rotherham. We're going to finish mid-table, so they've not really got anything to fight for. But it's a case of making sure that the season doesn't sort of peter out too much. We're going to take a short break to mark the halfway stage of this special preview episode. But we'll be back to chat about some of the more teams in a second. Hello and welcome back to this special League One Lowdown bumper preview episode with myself, Seb Jones, and Jamie Johnson from the usual review episode. We've got a full roster of League One fixtures this midweek, so we thought we'd give you an extra episode. Don't forget to give it a like and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. Our next game is the top side in the division at home, away, I beg your pardon, to a big side, Bolton Wanderers, who after sort of going through a bit of a lull spell, seem to have rejuvenated their spark in the side, and they're at home. Bolton versus Birmingham. How do you see this one going, Jamie?
Yeah, it's a big game, isn't it? I mean, you can tell we're not used to in the preview, just stumbling over who's at home, who's away.
Yeah. We need sacking.
It's 2 former Premier League teams, of course. It's 2 teams in really, really good form. Birmingham haven't lost in the league since November, but this you probably see is one of the toughest tests they'll have faced in that stretch, where Stephen Schumacher at Bolton is unbeaten in the league since coming in, just a couple of points off the playoffs. And I've got a question to put to you in terms of what something Ian Evatt said at the weekend, speaking on Sky. But in terms of the game itself, it's a massive game. You don't need us to tell you that. In terms of top of the table versus a team just outside the playoffs, and it's big profile teams. You expect a really bumper crowd out at the Tough Sheet Stadium, and for good reason, because this is a big game. This is a championship game of football, isn't it? Yeah. It's not a League One game of football. Perhaps next season it will be a championship game of football. But at least at the minute, we're in League One, and just a huge, huge game. 2 teams, as I mentioned, in really good form, and it just has all the ingredients for an exciting game, and a one that's important, perhaps more so for Bolton if possible, because Birmingham, obviously, they're up the top of the table. They've got that 8-point gap. They're flying, absolutely flying. Whereas Bolton have got a lot of teams to try and keep up with. They've got to keep pace with all these people around them. It's a bit like, I guess, like you see the relay races, and you want to keep pace with the people around you until the last person picks up the baton. Yeah. And then you want to win. You want to get there first. That's when the sprint comes in. You want to keep pace for as long as possible, that first little bit. And that's, I think, where Bolton are at the minute, just sort of trying to keep pace with everyone around them before someone makes that late dash. And it could be Bolton in terms of getting into the playoffs in this game. If they can pick up a win, which will be unexpected, unlikely, with obviously Birmingham doing so well, that's one hell of a boost for their playoff credentials.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess the takeaway from that would be that at the weekend, there was a result from Bolton against the other side in the promotion, automatic promotion spots. Wycombe and Wrexham, just outside the automatic promotion, they drew 0-0. Bolton and Wrexham. Wrexham, beg pardon. Yeah. You can see clearly out of habit.
Well, Wycombe played Birmingham, didn't they? This is where also there's all.
You know what I mean? They're all playing each other, so it gets quite confusing. So Wrexham drew 0-0 with Bolton at the weekend, who were just outside the automatic places, and obviously on Tuesday, then Bolton are playing Birmingham. So they drew 0-0 with a side just outside the automatic places, which I guess is a pretty solid result. A solid result would be a draw as well this midweek, but they want the win really. They can't really afford to just keep picking up draws, even though I guess for a side in that top spot, in the form Birmingham are in, a draw wouldn't be bad at all, particularly a 0-0 clean sheet draw.
Yeah, but definitely a draw is a good result against Birmingham for anybody in League One. But what I want to put to you in terms of Ian Evatt, of course, former Bolton manager, he spoke on Sky, said the decision for him to leave the club was mostly his, paraphrasing here, that he thought it was time to take a step back due somewhat to social media. We put a little bit of blame on that 5 years is a long time in the modern day because of social media was sort of the way he was framing things, and was ready to reassess, take a step back, have a bit of time away from the game. Really open, really honest in that description. And he seemed to give all the goodwill in the world to Bolton, to Stephen Schumacher, who we credited for doing a really good job since coming in, which of course he has already. But I wondered if you had a take on that before we shift along to the couple of other games we got to talk.
Yeah, it's interesting talking about the impact of social media. I guess it sort of shows the ever-changing landscape that football and the football clubs and the footballing world sort of has now in its relationship with social media. But it's interesting that he's come out and sort of admitted that the decision was mostly his. For a long time before he left, results just weren't good enough really for a stature of a club of their stature, a club of their size. Just, wasn't good enough. So I don't know. He probably felt the pressure from fans, not only from the stadium but also online as well. But I'm surprised that he actually saw the reaction online. I think a lot of managers and players sometimes they don't go on social media at all, and that's sort of good to help black out the noise. But evidently, I don't know the proper ins and outs of it, but evidently sort of he's had some access to the comments on social media and the fan reaction, which was pretty negative at the time. We chatted about this many times on this podcast. So yeah, I respect him for that, and obviously credit. He says he had a good time at Bolton as well, and he did the progress he made while he was manager there, and sort of send his well wishes on to Schumacher. And Schumacher, since coming in, has done wonders really, considering the negativity around the place when Evatt left, to then come in and sort of just boost that really and make such a difference that he has. I think it's really going to credit to Evatt for sort of pointing that out about Schumacher. So good manager, good managers. I think from kudos from one to another, which I think is good. Rare to see in football these days. The next game we'll move on is towards the bottom end of the table, and it's a big one actually. It's between Shrewsbury Town and Bristol Rovers. So I'll give you the picture in terms of the league table. Shrewsbury rock bottom, 24th. Bristol Rovers 20th place. There is 8-point gap between Shrewsbury and Bristol Rovers. Bristol Rovers occupy the last place of safety before the relegation 4. Big game for both sides, this, Jamie.
Yeah, exactly that, and it's must win for both. It's a proper 6-pointer again, just like Shrewsbury had at the weekend against Peterborough United. They lost that one, and it's 4 in a row in terms of defeats for them. Bristol Rovers 3 in a row. So it's two teams who are down the bottom of the table and struggling for form. One of them's got to get something out of the game, perhaps both of them if it's a draw. But you expect this one to go sort of, to use the old phrase, sort of hammer and tongs at it. Both teams to really go after the game. Shrewsbury did that. They went down to 10 men after about 7 or 8 seconds against Peterborough, but they were still fighting and still going after the game, trying to get something out of it. They weren't sitting back at all. So I expect this one to be pretty end-to-end, pretty exciting, and it's a huge game, really huge game down the bottom of the table. Shrewsbury have got to win it. They're 8 points off safety. This win against the team you mentioned there, Seb, who are that safety mark, cuts it to 5, and it's immediately just 2 games, isn't it? And then they've got next, they've got Burton and Exeter, I think in the other order, but that's who they've got next. So they just need to win. They really just need to win. to just keep themselves fighting and keep their heads. It wouldn't be out of the water, but slightly getting out of it. You know what I mean? You'll be able to see the forehead a little bit because at the minute you can't see anything of Shrewsbury. So it'd be interesting to see which way it goes at the end of the day. Bristol Rovers struggling, probably not playing really well either. I think the thing with Shrewsbury, as much as they're not winning games, they're still playing quite well. They played all right against Peterborough. Without the red card, they probably get something out of the game. They weren't a million miles off it, and they've put in decent performances against other teams of late too, whereas Bristol Rovers are losing games and putting in bad performances.
Yeah.
So I could see this going Shrewsbury's way, but I mean, we mentioned on the review show, perhaps I've been charmed by the charisma of Gareth Ainsworth. We spoke to him after the game with Peterborough. You can a little bit of a clip of that interview you can see on the main review show. But this is just, it's must win. That is the only way to describe it. It's a proper 6-pointer, and they just keep coming, really, in terms of these teams at the bottom of the table. They're all playing each other, and they all need the points.
They absolutely do. Yeah, but both, just before we move on to the final game, we're going to talk about in detail, both sides are actually on really bad runs of form. So Bristol Rovers, 3 defeats in a row ahead of the game on Tuesday night, and Shrewsbury Town, 4 defeats in a row ahead of the game on Tuesday night. So there's not really a lot to separate the two sides in terms of previous results. I think it'd be very tight, and I think only 1 goal in it, maybe a smash and grab by one of the sides. I couldn't tell you which way though, but certainly I don't think there's a lot. There's not a lot to suggest it's going to be open, and and clearly one of the sides is going to hope to break the golden duck of the poor defeat. So yeah. Interesting one at the bottom for sure. Bristol Rovers, I think, need the win more than Shrewsbury need the win, in my opinion.
It's controversial.
That's what I'm here for. The final game we'll look at in detail is a side at the top facing a side at the bottom, and that's Wycombe Wanderers hosting Burton Albion. So we mentioned before about Bristol Rovers being that well coveted safety spot. Just under them in 21st is Burton Albion, and they travel to Wycombe, who are in 2nd. Interesting one at both ends of the table, this one, Jamie.
Yeah, definitely that. We spoke about games that are interesting in the playoffs, games that are interesting in the relegation zone, and this is both of them, isn't it? Wycombe need to win to keep themselves above that chasing pack. Wrexham, Stockport, Huddersfield, they need to keep themselves above them with a victory here, whereas Burton need a win to leapfrog Bristol Rovers, perhaps, to leapfrog Exeter City, perhaps. You know what I mean? Those teams just above them, they just need to keep going, and they're in pole position in terms of the sides in the drop zone, in terms of pole position for getting out. But at the minute, they're still in there. A couple of points from safety, and Wrexham only just ahead of 3rd place. Wycombe only just ahead of 3rd place Wrexham, is what I was trying to say. They've not hit the heights, though, Wycombe, which is the point I wanted to bring, under their new manager. That 2 wins in 7. They've only lost 1, admittedly, but they're drawing too many games, and they're just not quite where they were under Bloomfield. And it's hard to put your finger on anything other than it being the manager hasn't settled fully. Even if they're not losing lots of games, they're just not winning enough either. This one's difficult for me to sort of swing it back to this, to phrase the question around the game itself, because Burton are very hard to beat. When they came to Lincoln just a couple of weeks ago, they got the late winner 1-0 in the end, but they're a really hard, really difficult team to beat. They fight, they make games difficult, they make games gritty and stop-start and scrappy, and can Wycombe deal with that? That's the question for me. But on that, as well as Dodds, I've got questions over Wycombe at the minute.
Yeah, I think we spoke about that when he was appointed as well. It's his first proper managerial appointment, not had a pre-season, sort of taking over a club overachieving, but doing really well. And he's just not quite been able to hit the same heights that his predecessor left for him. So, yeah, question marks over doors. I don't think any major question marks as such, but I know exactly sort of what you're going for in terms of, I guess, was he the right man to bring in the first place? And results haven't been good, but they've not been awful. So there's just sort of been a bit mid, really. in terms of Dodds while he's been at Wycombe. Burton Albion have got a bit of momentum coming in their back pocket, so they've got a good run of form ahead of this one, 2 wins and a draw. So, and another positive result just sort of edges that gap to Bristol Rovers ever closer and just bridges it slightly. And yeah, it's really big, and a defeat would be massive here for Wycombe. If Burton managed to clinch 3 points, then Dodds, even more question marks could be raised at Dodds and the original appointment. And yeah, that's obviously not to downplay Burton, but really Wycombe, aside of the top 2, should be doing much better than they are with some of the results they've picked up over the last few weeks. So yeah, it'll certainly interesting in that one. Yeah. A game affecting top and bottom, so it will be interesting. I thought in terms of the rest of the results, Blackpool host Peterborough. Peterborough turned the corner as Jamie was at the game on Saturday. Good win at home to Shrewsbury. Blackpool have been a bit hit and miss sometimes. A good result followed by not so great, with real more inconsistency there. Cambridge hosting Stevenage, certainly not one for the neutral. I can't see that being too exciting, in my opinion anyway. Mansfield host Wigan. 1 Wigan win in the last 8, and have just now obviously sacked their manager as well. So it'd be the first game for Glenn Whelan taking interim charge for Wigan, travelling to Mansfield, who got a point at Burton Albion at the weekend. Northampton
It's worth
Town,
saying
meanwhile,
as well, before you move on from Mansfield, they've got 2 points out of the last 30 available in League One. Just a couple of draws. So yeah, they're really struggling. Really struggling.
Having had a good start to the season as well, Mansfield. Northampton host Stockport, who were chasing the playoffs. Meanwhile, Northampton need to keep that distance between themselves and the drop zone. Crawley travel to Lincoln. 2 sides struggling for form and consistency, and Lincoln need to win to stop a bit of pressure from Skibala, Jamie.
Yeah, exactly that, really. I've put in my notes, it's both Michael Skubala and Jez George, the director of football. They just need to, because the pressure's on a little bit in terms of fans not being happy. We spoke about getting booed, jeered off at half time, and there was a big interview last week, which I think actually Jez George came across quite well in. A big interview we did 45 minutes or so with BBC Radio Lincolnshire, speaking about recruitment and recent form and such. A lot of the big hot topics around the club at the minute, but the pressure's on them and the pressure's on the club at the whole in terms of this really poor run over the past few weeks and months. Huge game this. I mentioned the exact words I mentioned on the review show. I sort of repeat that if they lose this, it's going to be a really unpleasant place to be at full time, I think.
Yeah.
Because they're struggling and you've got to beat teams like Crawley. And if they don't, it could be nasty come full time.
Indeed, it could. And then the final one on Tuesday to just round off the League One fixtures. Reading hosting Exeter City. Reading in 9th place, but actually only 3 points off Charlton in 6th in the playoff rankings. And Exeter, well, not been a good run of form in the last few weeks for them. So that concludes this bumper preview episode. Sam and Callum will be back with a preview episode of the weekend fixtures in just a few days' time. Just a reminder, if you're not already, to give this video a like and make sure you are subscribed to make sure that you don't miss any of our content. We'll be back in our usual preview review slot, I beg your pardon, summertime next week. But for myself and Jamie, till next time.